Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to our seminar on Korea and issues in the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia. This is the one of a series that we'll be hosting over the next few months. We are pleased to have a very fine panel, and I would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Michael Jenkins, who is president of the Washington Times Foundation, also president of Universal Peace Federation North America, and chairman of Washington Times Holdings. He's former director of the Northeast Asia Peace Initiative and the Middle East Peace Initiative, which have worked since the 1980s on conflict resolution in those two pivotal trouble spots on the Pacific Rim and in Palestine. Dr. Jenkins, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Moffett, and thank you for your leadership as Secretary General of the Universal Peace Federation. Welcome to everybody in our audience and also to our distinguished panelists that are here. We're very happy you could join this program that's going to focus on possibilities for peace between North and South Korea and America's role. We have distinguished leaders who are experts in the field and also those who have been involved in the academic world as well as the diplomatic and political world on working on denuclearization for North Korea. We have Congressman Dan Burton, Ambassador Joseph Tetrani, Dr. Alexander Manzarov, Mr. Fred Fleitz, and we're very, very happy to welcome you at this time. I'd like to give this moment of welcome. Thank you for coming and joining us. Our first speaker today is the Honorable Dan Burton, who's in the House of Representatives from 1983 to 2013. And I think he's become more active than ever since that time because he became the international co-chairman of the Association of Parliamentarians for Peace. They have 5,000 active members of Congress and members of Parliament throughout over 150 countries. And that's grown a lot under Dan's leadership. And we also, as we mentioned, he is head of that association that also has many diplomats in communist countries and other countries who have diplomatic relations with North Korea. And when we have our conferences in Korea, which all of our distinguished panel have been to at one time or another, we're able to dialogue with those members of parliament, and they have ongoing relationships with people in the North. So I'd like to welcome at this time the Honorable Dan Burton. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Mike, very much. And let me just start off by saying, and I always like to mention this, we really owe a great deal of gratitude to Mother Moon, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon, for all the efforts that she's put forth to make sure that these problems are resolved. And so I just like to remind everybody that she's working tirelessly now, and we owe a great deal of gratitude to her. Let me just start off by saying, it appears as though we may have a new president of the United States in Mr. Biden. And he and his administration is probably going to have different attitudes toward how they deal in foreign policy. And toward that issue, I'd like to say that one of the things that we need to do, and I'm talking about the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace and my colleagues who are on this show today, we need to do everything we can to work with the new administration, even if we have some differences, work with the administration to have them reach out to Kim Jong-un to make sure that the strides that have been taken by President Trump does not stop. It's so important right now, since we've been on the path to peace and the prospects of war between North and South Korea and the United States has really been pretty much at least resolved right now. We need to keep that moving forward. So I would like to urge everyone watching and my colleagues who are on the panel today and everybody in the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace to do everything we can to assist the United States, the new president, and the new administration in working together to make sure that the problems that we face in Korea continue to be headed in the right direction and that they're resolved. And I'm a Republican. The new president's a Democrat, but peace is so important that we all need to be working on this. And I think that we need to continue in that vein. And toward the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, Mike, I would like to have some kind of a message sent to the next president after the inauguration telling him that the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace are anxious to work with the administration to make sure that the strides that have been made are not reversed in any way. I think it would show a great deal of support from not only the United States, but around the world if we could make an outreach to the new administration.
Thank you, Dan. That's great. We'll make sure that happens. So we're very honored that Congressman Burton would spend this time with us. And we're really looking forward to the work to bring some kind of cooperation between Democrats and Republicans. One of Congressman Burton's close friend, Eliot Engels, who has been chairman of Foreign Affairs for many years, was one of his very close friends that he worked together with as he was a Democrat and Dan's a Republican, of course. We want to see somehow that Congress move back to those days when Dan Burton and Eliot Engels got so much done through cooperation between Democrats and Republicans, and they're both great patriots. Any comment on that, Dan?
Yeah, I would just, I'm glad you mentioned Eliot. We really need to reach out to Eliot. I have reached out to him right now with all the turmoil with the new election and everything. It's hard to get him to be able to devote the time to this, but we will reach out to him, and we'll reach out to others who are members of Congress to see if we can't get them involved with the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, and also to participate in conferences like the one we're having right now. So you're right on the money, Mike. That's one of the things we need to do right away.
Thank you very much, Congressman. The Washington Times is a co-sponsor of this fact-finding tour and webinar events that we have. And the Washington Times Foundation is affiliated with the Washington Times. And we've been really lucky to have their support and also be able to see some of the findings that our delegations make when they go to Korea end up as op-eds in the Washington Times. And one of those people who is a prolific writer and also commentator, as well as diplomat on the highest level, Ambassador Joseph Tetrani. He's a former U.S. Special Envoy to the six-party talks with North Korea. And he's on the board of managers of Sandia National Laboratories, adjunct professor at Missouri State University Graduate School, president of Intelligence and Security Alliance. And he's a former U.S. representative of the Korea Energy Development Organization. He serves as special advisor to the Director of National Intelligence and Director of National Counterproliferation Center. We really welcome you, Mr. Ambassador. When we go to Korea with Joe Tetrani, we are very happy because so many of the top people in the leadership of ROK come out to meet us and work with us. Ambassador Tetrani, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. It's an honor being here. Thank you to the Washington Times and to UPF for putting on this very important webinar. And it's great being with my distinguished colleagues on this panel. This is, as you said, Michael, a very important issue. And Congressman Burton emphasized that we're talking about peace on the Korean Peninsula. That's important. We've been striving for this for some time, certainly since the end of the Korean War. But we're talking most recently of the 26 years of negotiations with North Korea. And we've had some starts, we've had some success, but it's always 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And right now we're at a very crucial inflection point where for North Korea, we have the Party Congress, the 8th Party Congress coming up next month. And Chairman Kim Jong-un obviously will be talking about not only economic development and their nuclear programs, but also rapprochement and likelihood of resolution of issues with South Korea and certainly with the United States and with neighbors in the region. So that's happening. And we have, as Congressman Burton indicated, we have a new president coming in on the 20th of January this month, President Biden, who is very steeped in issues related to the Korean Peninsula. He was on the Foreign Affairs Committee for a number of years as vice president. He knows the issues related to the Korean Peninsula. And certainly he would be very supportive. And as Congressman Burton indicated, one of the key factors will be re-engaging with North Korea. Re-engaging with North Korea. President Donald Trump, in his 2 summits, had success, certainly in Singapore with that joint statement. That declaration coming out of Singapore that spoke about a transformation of a relationship with the United States, peace on the Korean Peninsula, complete verifiable denuclearization, and the repatriation of Americans who were killed during the Korean War, and repatriation, getting the remains back to the United States. That's an important success, and we should not lose sight of that. So President Biden has something to work with that's very tangible. And if the North Koreans would be willing to come back to negotiations, and I believe they will be willing to come back, and I believe that President Biden will be reaching out to North Korea and encouraging them to re-engage so that our senior negotiators from the United States can sit down with their counterparts in North Korea to determine if North Korea is still serious about the Singapore statement of June 2018. Because if they are, then there could be progress. And we learned from the failed Hanoi summit in February 2019 that it's not going to be complete verifiable denuclearization, as was the case with Libya. It's not going to be immediate. It's going to be a long process. And we know this because we've worked with the North Koreans on this issue. I certainly participated in the six-party talks. And we had some success with the joint statement in September 2005 that spoke about complete verifiable denuclearization, dismantlement of all nuclear weapons and facilities. But in return for what? Security assurances, economic development assistance, the lifting of all sanctions, and a path to normalization of relations with the United States, and certainly with South Korea, re-engagements with South Korea, movement towards reunification with South Korea. We've learned that very clearly. China hosted the six-party talks, so China is certainly part of this equation. But I think the initial steps will be, is North Korea serious about engaging with the United States? And I believe they are. Are they interested in pursuing the Singapore statement that was signed by Kim Jong-un, Chairman Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump? I think they are. And then we could move on the implementation. And from what we learned from Hanoi, where it's going to be a process that requires actions for actions, commitments for commitments. As we move towards denuclearization, the lifting of certain sanctions and movement towards a peace treaty that ends the Korean War. That is important, ladies and gentlemen, a peace treaty that ends the Korean War finally. And we can move towards diplomatic relations. But there are other issues when we finally get to complete verifiable denuclearization and we look at a normal relationship, which would entail a lot of other issues. Indeed, before there is respective embassies, but certainly we can have liaison offices in our respective capitals. So there's so much that could be done. And especially at a time like this, and I'll end on this note, with COVID-19 devastating all of our countries, and I believe it's touched North Korea, regardless of what they say about no cases in North Korea. And that sanctions are biting in North Korea. And then we know there's a lot of economic pressure in North Korea right now because those sanctions are biting and with this pandemic. So there are a lot of issues here that speak to humanitarian issues. If we could move forward with denuclearization and the selective lifting of sanctions and a dialogue to end the Korean War and transforming our relationship, this would be so positive, not only for the two Koreas, because we want to see a process of movement towards reunification. And with the Panmunjom Declaration between President Moon Jae-in and Chairman Kim Jong-un, there's movement on that and on that front, and we should encourage that. So as we pursue a denuclearization dialogue, South Korea and North Korea pursue intra-Korean relations, if you will, separated families coming together. We talk about visits to Mount Kumgang, reconstructing the liaison office at Kaesong, et cetera. So there's so much there, and there are a lot of opportunities. So I'm guardedly optimistic, and I think this is a time for all of us to weigh in on this, to say, not only do we support the two Koreas and the region globally, we support peace on the Korean Peninsula and complete verifiable denuclearization and a process towards reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Detrani. We're really always given a very precise and insightful view by your comments. And I really appreciate also your positive attitude, which you have been through so many different administrations, so many different efforts to bring North and South Korea together. And I see that you have maintained good friendships and relationships with every one of the key people in the six-party talks. And we noticed when we went to the National Assembly, we had a special meeting with Congressman Burton and members of the National Assembly. And also Fred Fleitz was there, Dr. Manzaroff and Joe. And it was so interesting that Joe's old friend, who was the Korean representative from the six-party talks, and Joe's counterpart as the US representative, Mr. Lee Soo-hyuk, was there, and they're old friends. And
Right.
lo and behold, those friendships really pay off, because just a few months later, he became the US, the ambassador to the United States from Korea. Ambassador Lee is a good friend and a very effective ambassador to the United States from Korea. And we thank you, Joe, for sharing that friendship with us. And we want to cooperate together with him
Right.
to help foster more understanding. This time, we're very honored to present a great scholar and a great expert on peace. Dr. Alexander Manzaroff is adjunct professor of security studies, Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University in Washington, president and CEO of Great Falls Solutions International, and senior associate of Alumni Insight. The founding member of the U.S. National Committee on North Korea, is frequently interviewed as an expert on North Korea by all major news media organizations. So welcome, Dr. Alexander Manzaroff.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to see you all healthy and safe. I'd like to, first of all, thank the UPF, Michael, Larry, and others for organizing this fabulous webinar, and especially Mother Moon for creating this platform for us to stay connected despite the pandemic, despite the lockdowns and all that. Today, I'd like to focus on three issues. First, I will cover three challenges facing North Korea, because that's the counterpart, that's the big problem, that's the threat. So we need to understand what's going on inside that country. Second, I'll cover four fallacies about North Korean views on the US policy towards North Korea. And finally, I will zoom in on one opportunity which we can exploit to move the ball forward. So first of all, three challenges facing North Korea. In a way, they're very similar to the challenges which are facing America. Believe it or not, although we're separated by oceans, by different systems, you know, we live almost in different ages, you know. But the first challenge is it's this senior leadership transition which is taking place in North Korea. Not the top leadership, but below Kim Jong-un level. In preparation for the 8th Party Congress, essentially Kim Jong-un decided to replace, I would say, about 85% of the party, military, and state senior leaders in that country. I'm looking at his visit to Kim Il-sung Memorial Palace to commemorate, you know, the new year, the photograph published by Nodon Sinmun, and most of the faces they knew and are known to me. And again, it's a reflection of the generational taste. It's a generational change. It's a reflection of Kim Jong-un's personal leadership preferences. But these are the people who are going to run North Korea in the next 5 years. Very different from the first, actually, 9 years of Kim Jong-un's rule. Remember, this gentleman is entering the 10th year of his rule. We all said he was young and experienced, he will not last, and yet this is the 10th year of Kim Jong-un's rule. Now the guy basically is the longest serving, the second longest serving leader in Northeast Asia. He outserved President Trump, Shinzo Abe, you know, Xi Jinping, Chairman Xi. Only Putin, you know, had served longer than Chairman Kim. And so now he's putting in place a new team of senior leaders in North Korea that will basically manage that country for the next 5 years. They'll have to adjust to each other, and that's not easy. Just like in the United States, I mean, we're dealing with the leadership change in this country. Believe me, in North Korea, it's not easy as well. The second challenge facing North Korea is economic recovery. Now, the new economic policies are going to be announced either today or tomorrow. I mean, the Party Congress, Ambassador Detrani mentioned, is underway in Pyongyang, although they're not yet publishing any news about it. Probably when the Congress is over, that's when they will start releasing in, large batches information about the Congress. But it is already underway. They're talking about new economic policies, basically, which will be implemented in the next 5 years. And the goal is to figure out how to mobilize domestic resources, capital, labor, land to sustain, first of all, to orchestrate, initiate the economic recovery, and then to sustain in the longer term some sort of economic rebuilding, despite the major disruptions in economic activities, which were caused by the closure of North Korean-Chinese border and the disruptions of North Korean foreign trade, which were caused by the pandemic, and more importantly, by the international sanctions, which are biting. I agree with Ambassador Detrani here. They're hurting. Sanctions are hurting. And finally, a series of natural disasters, which North Koreans still can't figure out how to basically get a grip on. Okay. And the third challenge, which the North Korean leadership is facing, is basically the need to modernize the nation's healthcare system, just like everybody else, by the way, in light of what happened to them during the pandemic. Officially, they say, they don't have it. And yet, we do not want one situation to unfold. Let's say, imagine the day, a year from now, 2 years, give your own timeline, when we all are finally feeling a little bit better, more secure that the pandemic is over. And yet in North Korea, there will be that last safe haven for those viruses, for those COVID-19 bugs. And we will have no access, and we will have no way of knowing, whether they were able to get rid of the virus, to get a handle on it or not. So we want to make sure that we have transparency, that we have access to the healthcare system. And by the way, they have the same interest, shared interest there with us. Let alone they want to have access to the internationally approved vaccines at affordable cost. Because as you just heard the news probably from Europe coming out, that now the European nations are going to require everybody to be vaccinated. If you want to get a Schengen visa, then you'll have to get vaccinated with the approved vaccine, not the Russian, not the Chinese. And that, race to get, the vaccine which will be approved, which will open your doors to Europe or the United States, North Koreans will also want to be, to get a little piece of that action as well. Now, these are three challenges: governance, leadership transition, economic recovery, modernization of the healthcare system. Speaking about the fallacies about the North Korean perceptions of possible Biden administration policies towards Pyongyang. There are 4 of them, and I'll be very brief. Number one, some people believe that the new administration will pursue the all but Trump policy. Basically, no summit meetings on the one hand, and no maximum pressure on the other hand. And by the way, this will be just fine with North Koreans. They got a lot from the summits. They can rest a little bit without them. And if there's no maximum pressure, again, so much better for them. And inadvertently, it will confirm their belief, the North Korean belief, that any U.S. government's policy towards North Korea lasts only for 4 or 8 years. And every new administration, all but Clinton, all but Obama, all but Trump, that's what happens. So the value of any piece of paper, any agreement signed with the U.S. administration really is dated 4 to 8 years. So all but Trump, they say it's fine with them. The second choice, Some people say maybe the Biden administration will pursue the Obama 3. You know, it will be like Obama's third term, and essentially the policy towards North Korea will be like strategic patience 2.0. If anything, again, this will be fine with Pyongyang as well. Why? Because it will give them time essentially to rebuild the economy, you know, slowly, as well as to augment gradually their military capabilities. That's what happened during the first and second terms of President Obama. So Obama 3, strategic patience 2.0, just fine. Thank you very much, they would say in Pyongyang. Third option could be, some people say maybe the Biden administration will go Clinton light, you know, basically just like the Clinton administration, it will pursue an engagement policy, but without Kido, like this Korean Energy Development Organization style commitments to North Korea, heavy financial commitments, infrastructure development commitments. And again, in my opinion, Pyongyang will be just fine with the Clinton light policy approach emanating from Washington. Why? Because it will open venues for them to procure international resources to build back better. You know, the Democratic slogan, I mean, they love it actually. They want to build their country back better. And if we open up channels for them to benefit from international advice and international resources, so much so the better. And the fourth policy is if Biden administration really decides to pursue the Bush light policy, that is maximum pressure, but without any diplomacy, after disengaging from North Korea. Now, if I'm in Pyongyang, this will not be credible, really. North Koreans will not regard this policy as credible at all. Why? Because they know the US is not going to expand and step up military exercises because of the pandemic. As far as the sanctions are concerned, I mean, we already tightened the screws so much that there is no way we can further tighten the screws. So again, the sanctions threat is no longer credible. And plus, you know, you all need China's cooperation in this. And because of the US-China rivalry, really, you know, any hopes that we can outsource our policy to China or China will play along, just like in the Bush years, these are delusional hopes in North Korean mind. So these are the four fallacies. Now, the final point, I'd like to highlight or zoom in on one opportunity which the new administration now has, in my opinion, and that is the opportunity to basically, you know, having learned the lessons of the Clinton years, Bush years, Obama years, and the Trump years, just as Ambassador Detrani said, having studied all the agreements which we reached before and failed to implement, you know, both sides, all sides, I would recommend, you know, that we need to think seriously about entering into strategic arms control talks with North Korea, aimed at detente, at relaxation of tensions, at confidence building measures, including the adoption of the declaration of the end of the Korean War, which ultimately would lead us towards normalization of diplomatic relations. You know, personally, you know, we tried at all approaches, bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, six-party, whatever. I believe we need to start just one-on-one. Eventually, US-North Korea expanded to the south, end up with trilateral. In my opinion, it's much more effective than any multilateral, although again, I would defer here to Ambassador Detrani. And the goal must be, in my opinion, to flip North Korea, if you will, to make it a friend of the United States, if not, you know, ally, instead of crashing it. We won't be able to crash North Korea. Again, there is so much more that we need to discuss with North Korea other than nuclear weapons. Although nuclear weapons, it's a serious business, but, you know, North Koreans are engaged in cyber warfare against the United States. I mean, cyber criminality. We know how many banks they robbed, you know, using cyber offensive tools. The health, disease control and prevention measures, we need to discuss those with them, let alone the human rights and, you know, and we cannot do it if we do not talk at the strategic level. So in conclusion, basically, I believe that we have the opportunity to open a new chapter in US-North Korea relations by initiating a sustained strategic dialogue at a senior working level via presidential envoys. And by the way, Ambassador, I would vote for you, in a second to represent this mighty country. We should culminate those presidential envoy exchanges. They should culminate really at the summit level when we will be able proudly to talk about full normalization of relations, removal of the military threat from each other. Essentially, I can envision a moment then, just like the Israelis and Palestinians were brought to the White House, and the U.S. president helped them shake those hands and make peace. We would bring, the leaders of two Koreas, Chairman Kim, President Moon, to the White House with President Biden basically orchestrating that historic resolution of the Korean dispute. But for that to happen, we must be patient, we must be determined, and we must be creative. Again, I appreciate really very much, the fact that Mother Moon created this opportunity for us to exchange some new ideas and make sure that people in the policy world, the new people, will hear them. So Happy New Year, everybody. And I hope to see you all soon in person in Seoul in the near future.
Thank you, Dr. Manzaroff. It's just wonderful to hear your insights, reflections, and very precise points. I remember when it appeared that Chairman Kim had disappeared, and many said he was under being operated on by Chinese surgeons and this and that. And I know that the Times contacted you and you were unequivocal that he was not ill and he was fine. And when the whole world of media was claiming it's a conclusive proof that he's gone. So you're very, very astute on that. And Ambassador Detrani also knew that same answer. So we thank you for that insight and understanding and these ideas of dialogue. We totally support that with UPF. No matter what, we need to communicate. So you're really contributing to that through this and other webinars. So thank you. Mr. Fred Fleitz is the current president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. In 2018, he was deputy assistant to the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, and chief of staff to the National Security Council. He also spent 25 years as a career intelligence person with the Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, State Department, and House of Representatives Intelligence Committee. He authored several highly effective and acclaimed books, including The Coming North Korea Nuclear Nightmare in 2018. So a commentator on security issues on US and foreign television, widely known and respected in major news publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Times, and the Jerusalem Post. So we welcome Mr. Fred Fleitz. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael, especially the Washington Times. I'm always honored to be in the Times. I'm afraid I have a less optimistic view of our prospects for peace with North Korea under a Biden administration. And I say this because it appears that Joe Biden and his aides are taking the view of the foreign policy establishment that President Trump's efforts for peace with North Korea have been an abysmal failure. And instead, Biden intends to return to the same failed diplomatic approaches of the past that I think have simply allowed North Korea to deceive our country and to move ahead with their nuclear missile programs. It is a matter of faith in the mainstream media and the foreign policy establishment that President Trump's policy failed because he didn't denuclearize North Korea, because North Korea continued short-range missile tests, that it continued to develop its nuclear and missile program, despite the fact there was a pause in testing. And Joe Biden has said on many occasions that he thinks that President Trump made a mistake in meeting with Kim, but because he was legitimizing a bloodthirsty dictator. And as a result, we're hearing that the Biden team wants to use traditional diplomacy at lower levels with North Korea. And there would have to be basically commitments in advance before there would be higher level meetings. And the Biden team wants to work on this in coalitions with our allies. And that all sounds very good. And I hope that that works. But I got to tell you, I don't think it's going to work. And the problem with that, it doesn't recognize what President Trump achieved over the last 4 years. He didn't succeed in getting North Korea to shut down its nuclear program, but there's been no nuclear tests since September of 2017. Long-range missile tests, including missiles that could hit the east coast of the United States, they stopped. There were some short-range tests beginning in mid-2019, but the dangerous long-range tests have halted. And for North Korea to develop these missiles into ICBMs that could hit the US, they have to be tested. We know tensions have been significantly decreased on the Korean Peninsula because of Trump's diplomacy. It looks like Trump had some movement with North Korea when he met at the head of state level, but at lower levels, there really wasn't much movement and the regime was resistant. I think the reason the regime was resistant is because it is used to a unrelenting pattern in working with previous US administrations, Republican and Democrat, that if they hold out long enough, they'll find that we want to deal more than the North Koreans do, and the US will front load its negotiations to get an agreement. President Trump was never willing to do that. He wanted North Korea to denuclearize and commit to denuclearize before sanctions were dropped. And there's another element here that I don't think that the Biden team understands. That's how President Trump was so unconventional and willing to throw out the foreign policy rulebook. And it wasn't just meeting with Kim. It was his ability to trump the North Koreans in terms of threats. You may remember in September of 2017 when President Trump threatened to totally destroy North Korea. He said that from the floor of the UN General Assembly to the horror of diplomats around the world. But the president said this, given the threat that North Korea is posing at the time with their missile launches, with a nuclear test that may have been a hydrogen bomb or some type of hybrid weapon. In early 2018, we were looking at the prospect of war with North Korea. That was avoided because of this diplomacy. But I think Trump also made progress with the North Koreans because of his inherent unpredictability. You may remember there was the Singapore summit in June of 2018, but you may not remember in May of 2018, when after weeks and weeks of threats by the North, President Trump sent a letter to Kim saying he was pulling out. The North Koreans were stunned that an American president could be so unpredictable, so volatile, more volatile than them. They were worried what President Trump would do next. And the same thing happened at the Vietnam summit when the North Koreans tried to bully us because thinking we wanted an agreement more than they did. And from indications they got from the State Department, lower level folks at state, they did want to make concessions far more than President Trump did. And I think the North Koreans were misled to an extent. And I said this in my trip with the Washington Times to South Korea in 2019. President Trump walked away. He wanted a good deal or no deal, and the North Koreans couldn't believe it. They had never seen this from an American president. You know, it just violates the rules of diplomatic protocol that there can be a meeting that's called a failure. Every meeting is called a success in some way. There's always a communique to try to claim that something was achieved and there's hope for the future. President Trump cut the meeting off. He humiliated Kim. But I think Kim also recognized that to deal with President Trump, he was going to have to keep his promises. And I think there were some good prospects in 2021 if Trump had been reelected, that we may have been able to move forward in terms of denuclearization and doing away with North Korea's missile program. Now, with Biden condemning what Trump did and saying he wants to return to traditional lower level diplomacy, that's failed repeatedly in the past. The six-party talks were a joke. They were an absolute failure. We saw the way the North Koreans manipulated the Clinton administration with the agreed framework, cheated on that agreement while the ink was still drying, according to Colin Powell. And then at the end of the George W. Bush administration, the disastrous negotiations conducted by Condi Rice and her team to try to get a deal that the North Koreans cheated on weeks after it was agreed to. And Condi has written about this in her memoir, how basically the United States was taken to the cleaners by the North Koreans because we wanted an agreement more than they did. My hope is that Joe Biden and his advisors will take a sober look at what happened and not make the mistakes of the past, not come in saying we're throwing out everything Trump did and we're just going to start over. We're going to bring in the Chinese, we're going to bring in the South Koreans, and we're going to do better. That's not going to work. Working bilaterally with North Korea was making progress. Trump's strong position, negotiating from a position of strength, that made progress. I hope Joe Biden looks at these developments in the Trump administration and makes some sound decisions. Right now, I'm afraid I'm not optimistic.
Thank you, Fred. Excellent presentation. And also your insights being right there in the NSC are quite significant.
Thank you.
So what do you think the first steps will be? Do you think there's any possibility of reopening the talks? We had the meeting in Singapore, and then we had the Hanoi meeting, which the president walked out on, just like Reagan did with Gorbachev. And also in the DMZ, when he went to the DMZ, I believe it was June of 2019, he crossed over for the first time a president had done that. So there was some engagement going on, and it hasn't opened up since then. What's the possibility of some kind of communication at the top right now?
Well, first of all, I think North Korea may engage in some type of provocations, just like the Iranians are preparing to do, to force Biden's hand. But I think the bilateral talks are over. Biden will probably resume some type of multilateral process, maybe resume the six-party talks. And once China and North Korea are involved, I think the prospect of tough pressure on North Korea and the prospect that they will make real concessions drops considerably.
Thank you. Very good. Well, now we'd like to have some questions. A number of questions came in from our audience. We have a very diverse audience here. There's about 300 on Facebook, and there's also direct participation from about 70 people total here. So first, to Congressman Dan Burton, what changes can we expect from China toward the Biden administration regarding Northeast Asia? What do you
Well,
think?
I think that's a matter of real conjecture right now, since there's been so many things said about the relationship between President-elect Biden and his family in China. I would hope that our position with China would be strong and would remain resolute as far as a number of things are concerned. Trade. China has been stealing our intellectual property rights for years. They have been the beneficiaries of huge surpluses in trade, and President Trump has brought all that to a screeching halt. Now, with the new administration, it's hard to decide or determine how they're going to deal with China, especially since it appears as though President-elect Biden has a different attitude towards China than President Trump has had. So I think it's up in the air. I'm not sure that any person right now can make a determination on what's going to happen with Biden, other than I think that the relationship that we've had with China is going to be loosened by Biden instead of being very strong and effective, in my opinion, with President Trump.
Thank you, Congressman. You've been at this for a few years and you've seen different administrations, and certainly we are recognizing more and more that China is the most serious threat to stability and peace in Northeast Asia.
Can I add one more thing, Mike? China has threatened to control the South China Sea. They've been building a military operation, so to speak, and an island in that area. And the President Trump, has said time and again that we'll live up to our agreement with Taiwan, and we'll make absolutely sure that the sea lanes remain open. And these are very, very important things as far as not only trade, but military control of that entire region. So I would hope that the Biden administration would look very strongly at what President Trump has, in my opinion, accomplished, and try to make sure, even though they have their differences, that they make sure they have a strong attitude in dealing with China.
Michael, could I add a point complementary to Congressman Burton's? We all so much focused on trade, and of course, the economic relationship is very important between the US and China. But let's not forget about, and Ambassador Trani knows it very well, and Fred as well, the Chinese spying in the United States is a record high. I mean, the military modernization, the Chinese armament program is just accelerating. I mean, the amount of money they're putting in modernizing the military is just unbelievable. I mean, we're paranoid about the North Korean military threat, but it pales in comparison. It's nothing when you think about the Chinese military threat, especially in a contentious, hostile relationship, which seems to be emerging between the United States and China. So it's cyber warfare, spying, espionage. It's the armament, unbridled armament development. Let alone, we're worried about human rights situation in North Korea, but just look across the border.
Yeah.
I mean, in China, and the numbers are staggering. I mean, nothing in North Korea comes anywhere close to, the prison population in China, the way they're treated, whether it's Xinjiang, whether it's in general prisons in China. So if you think about all these issues, of contention between our two countries, I think, it will be not easy for the new administration to walk away from President Trump's legacy of his very principled, determined, I'd say engagement with China, not just disengagement, principled engagement, from the position of strength with China.
Okay, very good. Ambassador Trani, any thoughts on how to engage China?
Well, as
In the United
Alexandra and Congressman Burton have indicated, the Trump administration has taken a very, I think, principled position when we talk about intellectual property theft, when we talk about a free and open Indo-Pacific region, when we talk about the South China Sea, when we talk about human rights issues in Xinjiang, we talk about the national security laws that affected Hong Kong. So I think the Biden administration is going to be, has to be very mindful of all that. And I think they would embrace those initiatives taken by President Donald Trump. I don't think there will be any disagreement when it comes to a free and open Indo-Pacific region, whether it's the South China Sea, whether it's human rights in Xinjiang, national security laws in Hong Kong, or certainly intellectual property theft. I think the difference will be they will look for engagement with allies and partners. I think re-entering into the Trans-Pacific Partnership so that China doesn't have an open playing field, so that the US shows we're very viable and we're very much a player in the Southeast Asia, but the Indo-Pacific region writ large. And I think we've seen that with Mike Pompeo and his visits to the region. And I think a free and open Indo-Pacific region, I think in the Quad, I think it's very, very clear where this administration has been. And I think the Biden administration will complement that and build on that, knowing that leadership in the region is very, very necessary. And let me say this also, on areas where there could be cooperation with China, like with pandemics, like with counter-proliferation and non-proliferation, like with piracy at the sea. I can go down the whole thing, international crime, whether it's narcotics trafficking, areas where we can have common interests. We're prepared. We would be prepared to work in those areas, but not see the playing field to China, not let China get along with its predatory practices in the region and beyond. So I think there'll be areas where they will complement and build on what President Donald Trump has done, I think in a very positive direction, in a positive way. But I think they would complement that with movement towards more of an active role in the region and looking for partners and allies to be more outspoken about these issues.
If I could add, if I could add something to that, I think it's essential we have a bipartisan movement, maybe an international movement, that President Trump was not exaggerating the threat from China and the Chinese Communist Party as an existential threat to global peace. I'm all for engagement, but if we recognize that this is a state that doesn't really want to engage, it wants global domination, and we look at the criminal negligence of the Chinese Communist Party on the coronavirus, allowing this virus to become a dangerous pandemic, protecting its people and letting the world suffer, it's important that Biden recognize that Trump was not exaggerating the threat from China. And it's absolutely essential that we not drop our defenses, we not treat China like any other state, and we not give it a veto over our foreign policy.
Fred, we have a question to you from Roger Weatherall, one of the UPF leaders in the United States. He's asking Mr. Fleitz, what do you think IAPP, the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, led by Congressman Burton, and the UPF that you've seen in Korea and around the world, can play in negotiating or helping the peace process, including the discussions between North and South Korea outside of the regular political channels?
I think UPF and other non-government organizations can play an important role by dealing with the North Korean government and telling them they were shown another way by President Trump, that there is a possibility of cooperating, that they do not need a nuclear deterrent, that there is a possibility that the door is open for cooperating with the United States, and that they should pursue that door that was opened by Trump. And I'm hoping that that's the way that they're going to go. But I think one-on-one discussions like that keep the U.S. out of it. I don't want to see, I am concerned sometimes that the South Koreans are too eager for a deal. They're willing to give away concessions without the North meeting those concessions. But if there was some reasonable dialogue to make that point, I think would be helpful.
Thank you. Another question, this is for Joe and also Dr. Manzaroff. Should we require the complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization before we sign formally a document ending the Korean War?
Well,
Yep.
let me start and I'll look to Alexander.
Okay.
A declaration to end the Korean War is a declaration. It's not ending, it's not a peace treaty. A peace treaty will require more engagement, it will require, I personally believe, congressional oversight, because we're talking about a treaty and that would go to Congress. So, but a declaration speaks to intent. I think if we could get North Korea to move towards complete, verifiable denuclearization, that means dismantlement of all their nuclear weapons and their nuclear weapons facilities, to include highly enriched uranium facilities. That was part of the rub in Hanoi between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, where they weren't prepared to put the highly enriched uranium facilities on the table. And that's where the president said, you need to include that. If they're prepared to put that on the table and move towards denuclearization, that means starting to dismantle and so forth, I see no problem with the United States side coming out with the support of South Korea. Now, I think we just have to be totally in sync with South Korea and all these issues here, because this is the Korean Peninsula. And if anything affects South Korea, it's North Korea with their nuclear programs and other activities that could profoundly affect the security of the region, and certainly South Korea. So I think a declaration, if there's movement towards complete verifiable denuclearization, I take the word irreversible out of it, because I'm not sure you can get irreversible, but complete verifiable you can get. And there's movement towards that. I could see we could make a declaration with the intent. But then when you move towards a peace treaty, that requires a great dialogue and much more participation. Alexandra?
I have a more cynical view of this declaration of the end of the Korean War. It's just a piece of paper. Basically, it means nothing to North Korea, and it will has some symbolic value, which is shrinking rapidly as we move away from July 1953, when the hostilities were ceased. So again, we're probably getting the last drops of fuel from that gas tank. It won't get us far. Now, I see it more as a confidence building measure towards opening some substantive, meaningful conversation with the North Koreans. I mean, they're not, in my opinion, they're not going to make any concessions at all just to get that piece of paper signed declaring the formal end of the Korean War. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, our president already met with the leader of North Korea. I mean, can you imagine Hitler and Roosevelt meeting? And I'm not making any comparisons here, just like representatives of two hostile nations at war meeting with each other. Of course not. So we are not, formally, yes, we're in a state of ceasefire, not even a war, but it's like between Russia and Japan. There is no peace treaty there. There's no formal declaration of war. So what? I mean, relations are normalized. I mean, they're talking to each other like two normal nations. The same, I mean, I think we crossed that bridge with respect to the declaration of the end of the war. I mean, they're still trying to squeeze some mileage out of this, both in the South and in the North. But really, it's very symbolic. It will not enhance their security a bit. Then I don't see them willing to sacrifice anything, putting anything substantive on the table just to get that piece of paper signed. So we may, delude ourselves by thinking that, okay, let's get them first commit to full, complete, irreversible denuclearization, and then we will give them that carrot. It's an empty carrot. They don't need it. They don't want it. We have to stop deceiving ourselves in this regard. So it's a nice confidence building measure, but again, very little confidence will be built up, in my opinion.
Thank you. I've got a message here from Representative Joy Garrett. She's a state representative in New Mexico, Democrat. Thank you to all the panelists for your insights. Our economy in New Mexico and throughout Southwest United States, where Taiwan is heavily investing in the development of businesses based here, is directly affected by the geopolitics of East Asia. Your global perspectives are extremely valuable. In that light, I would like to turn to Dan Burton and Fred to ask, do you think China will make some move under the Biden administration to do something to aggressively stop Taiwan or try to take back Taiwan? Fred?
Oh, okay.
I don't think that's coming in the Biden administration, at least not in the next 4 years. I think it's coming. And I do worry the message that U.S. indecisiveness and weakness shows to our enemies. So I guess the chances of China doing something are increased, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next 4 years.
And why not in the next 4 years?
I think China is very
Fred,
patient.
why?
It will make a move when it's ready. I don't think the Chinese Communist Party is ready to do that just yet. It's just my assessment. But look, only the people who know are in Beijing.
Michael, could I just add one thought after Congressman Burton? Dan, go ahead, Dan.
Dan, go ahead.
Let me just say that China, I think, will make decisions based upon their perception of the strength of the United States. I think Fred's probably right. But if they perceive that there's weakness in the Biden administration, I think they're going to push, and they're going to push, and they're going to push in a number of areas, one of which will be Taiwan, because that's been a bone of contention for a long time. Let me just add something on a parallel subject. Ronald Reagan said to Gorbachev, trust but verify. And he said, peace through strength. And those are two things that are absolutely essential for the United States to be able to negotiate with anybody, but particularly China and North Korea. Now, when President Trump came in, our military had been just decimated. And he spent billions and trillions of dollars to make sure that we brought our military up to snuff. And the reason he did that was to make sure that if any adversary, China or anyone else, was intent on making overtures militarily toward Taiwan or anything else where we already have an agreement, we would be strong enough to deter that. And one of my big concerns is that the attitude under previous administrations, and I'm go back to Obama and even Bush, and our military has not been built up to the position it's been for some time. And I'm very concerned that with the extreme expenses that are taking place because of the virus and other things, that there may be an attitude towards severe defense cuts. And I would just say that the one thing that's absolutely essential in dealing with these countries, particularly China, but North Korea as well, is that we make sure our military strength is up to snuff, number one. Number two, that when we negotiate, as has been said by my colleagues, from a position of strength, and to be able to verify, as Reagan said, verify. Trust, but verify.
Thank you, Congressman. For the last word, Dr. Manzaroff.
Oh, didn't mean to be the last word, but I would always defer to anything about China to Ambassador Detrani with his experience of direct negotiations and dealing with China. I would agree with Fred that China is here for the long game, long term, and they're extremely tough bargainers. But I recall, a conversation I had once with one of the advisors of President-elect Chen Shui-bian in year 2000, when I went to Taiwan to observe elections when the Democratic Party landslide victory. And he told me point blank, you Americans, you're worried too much about the military attack from China on Taiwan, but the Chinese, they have like 100, maybe 150 different ways they can put a squeeze on us before it comes to an attack. And on that escalation ladder, they're still nowhere near to the military solution. So I wouldn't worry as much about that. But I would always defer to Ambassador Detrani, who should have the last word.
No, let me just add one thing, and I know we're running out of time. Thank you, Alexander. And I agree with Fred and with Congressman Burton. Look, we have the Taiwan Relations Act. That's very clear. The Taiwan Relations Act passed in 1979 by the Congress of the United States, making it very clear that the resolution of Taiwan will be done peacefully. And this is the US commitment to Taiwan, that it will be done through peaceful means. And I think what we've seen with the Trump administration, with the visits, the high-level visits, with the material, with the, if you will, the weapons that have been sold in the process of being sold to Taiwan. And I think Taiwan's capabilities, military capabilities, are also rather significant. I think it would be foolhardy on the part of China to think that the US would not be concerned and very much involved in that. And that would be really, and that's where I agree with you, Fred. I don't think China is going to go that way. But the fact of the matter is we have to be resolute, and we have to keep reminding that we are there. And a peaceful resolution is what we talked about. Peaceful resolution, not through arms, efforts on the part of the People's Republic of China.
Ladies and gentlemen, and to our distinguished panelists, our time has run out. We'd love to go further, but there will be an opportunity every week at 2 p.m. for the next 10 weeks. We're going to have Focus on Korea with this weekly webinar. Next week will be a business focus. So if you'd like to recommend those who are in business that have insights on dealing with future business development in North Korea, and possibly with South Korea and North Korea together, that's a very interesting topic. Or any of the other areas, like what role our nations can continue to play. We will have different topics every time, but we'll be inviting you back very soon. And Congressman Burton will continue to host the IAPP globally, and with your congressmen from all throughout America. We're getting a tremendous response. So I want to give Congressman Burton just a final moment to say good night.
Well, good night, everybody. But I'd like to say it's extremely important that legislators around the world and in the United States do everything we can to put pressure on or to urge North Korea, South Korea, China to negotiate. And if they see pressure from around the world, I think it could have a very positive impact. And Mike, I hope we can send a letter to the new president urging him to work with IAPP. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Fred, any final remark?
No, this is a great panel. I'm very grateful for being here. And we have other experts we'd love to offer you for these panels if you're interested.
Wonderful. We need your advice and insights. I'd like to turn it back to Mr. Larry Moffat, the Secretary General of Universal Peace Federation for North America, to give us any final directions Larry, thank you for putting this program together. He's kind of the person that really makes it all work. So let's give Larry our thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. As Dr. Jenkins said, we're going to do this every week. We're going to have a business focus. I was reminded by Representative Garrett's comment that there's a great deal of business being conducted throughout the United States, throughout the world with Asia. And we encounter it every time we go shopping. So I'm looking forward to a good business discussion with people that are out there that are in the various hubs around the country. And certainly we'll take advantage of your expertise in putting together experts for future panels. Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
a wonderful job as moderator.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful
you.
evening. Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Be here. Thank you.